So, I'd like to begin this talk with a story. Earlier this year, I went on a 500-mile road trip around Scotland. It's truly one of the most beautiful countries you can ever visit, and it's so close to us. And on this trip, I was really keen to stay off my phone. I spend far too much time on it on a day-to-day basis. But perhaps the thing I was most keen to see was a wild Scottish stag. They're truly incredible animals, extremely majestic. And I'd looked and looked throughout the whole 500 miles. And as we were driving through the woods, I looked down to change a song on Spotify, and guess what? A wild stag straight across the road, and I missed it. The whole 500 miles, I didn't see one. And what that went to show me is how much life we can miss in such a short amount of time through looking at rectangular screens. I'd like to ask you all a question. Can everyone in here that's almost walked into a lamppost because they were too busy looking at their phone, or almost missed a joke because they were too busy checking Instagram, please put your hands in the air. So, as expected, it's a lot of you. And what that goes to show is that living life through a screen has become the new normal. And how does that make the world a better place? To me, the balance between digital and life is what's key. I have the power, you have the power, and we as a collective have the power to make sure that the balance between spending time on our phone and spending time together is correct. I'm confident that no one in here would want to give up digital completely. Indigenous tribes have forever lived without technology. But if I asked any of you in here today, would you really want to go and live with them, with the knowledge of what we now have? I'm not so sure you would. Yet equally, I hope I never fall guilty of lessening my enjoyment of a moment by filming it. Too many times I go to the football and people are stood there like this, trying to capture every pass. Just watch Match of the Day at night. Like it's so daft. I really envy the older generation who seem more bothered about living in a moment, enjoying the moment, than they do about recording it so they can show their friends on Instagram that I went to the football on Saturday. The reason for this addiction is digital media, the mix between technology and content. It's evolved from the radio, where people like Churchill have had famous speeches throughout time, all the way through to streaming. I spend hours on end every week watching Netflix. I'd like to think I'm not the only person in the room that's seen this screen. For those of you that don't know, it's essentially a screen that says, "Are you still alive? You have not moved in 4 hours, you're on your 7th episode in a row, and it's just getting too much. Get outside and go and live." Well, I explained this screen to my manager. He'd never seen it before. And that was gobsmacking to me. Not because of who he is, but because it's such a normal thing in my life. He's never had that experience that I get on a day-to-day basis, where I look down at my iPad screen, and the screen's gone black, and all I see looking back at me is my own 7 chins. It's awful. It's petrifying. But where do I think it's going to go next? Well, I think it'll be something that's been discussed since 1935. Virtual reality, where you will quite literally be able to do whatever you want. Virtual reality, you'll be able to do anything you've ever dreamed of. Being wherever you want, doing whatever you want, anything. Look at this guy. He's having the time of his life. He could be flying through space, seeing a dinosaur for the very first time, or maybe seeing a stag that he missed on a trip because he was fed up of the ABBA playing over and over. My point is, you'll be able to do whatever you as an individual have wanted to do. Well, me? What might I do, I hear you ask? Well, I might go to the beach. But I'd go to the beach and give myself a six-pack, make myself more tanned, and most importantly, I'd make myself less ginger during summer. Which I now realise, looking at Matt, was quite a bad joke, seeing as he's one of the judges. Elon Musk is among one of the believers, and he really believes that at some point, VR will become indistinguishable from real life. When can we expect it? Well, some people estimate that it will be as close as 2024, yet other estimates as far away as 2050. So keep an eye out for that day that we finally see real life become digitalised. This is an idea that I explained to multiple individuals, and as expected, the older the interviewee, the more sceptical they were about the technology. My gran asked why I'd pretend to do these things, and a 9-year-old was like this, he was so excited. But what do we think in this room? I'd like to ask that anyone who's a bit sceptical about the benefits of VR, could you please put your hands in the air? Okay, so that's quite a few of you. Can I please ask that you just keep them up just for a brief moment? I promise it's not like a gym exercise. So let me ask you this question. If you or a loved one were about to undergo surgery by a newly qualified doctor, they'd never operated on a real human before, which doctor would you choose? Dr. A, who's only ever read about the procedure and only ever seen it performed a few times? Or would you choose a doctor who's seen it, read about it, and then performed it in an indistinguishable world? Does anyone want to change their minds? That's quite a few of you. And there's a reason for this. There's a theory called the cone of learning. And what that explains is that if you purposefully experience something, you'll remember 90% of what you're taught. Compare that with a book. You'll only remember 10% of it. So the difference is massive. And it's why uptake is on the rise for virtual reality. Multiple industries, including healthcare, are using it because it's a safe, effective, and affordable way to train staff. The New York Police Department, for example, another example of people who are using virtual reality as a training tool, so that when they face a real threat, they're more effectively drilled. But what can we do? Well, some of you might recognize this building. It's Sellafield. Well, how do you think they train for a radiation leak? They can't exactly release real radiation into the world. It would cause massive damage to everyone around the area and put the real population of the UK at risk. Well, imagine if I told you that Atos could create a personalized training experience for Sellafield, so that when they trained, they'd be in a fully immersive world. Everything would feel completely real. But most importantly, it'd be safe. It could really have a real good commercial value for us to offer this to a number of clients. But it doesn't necessarily have to be expensive. Games such as Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes, it's essentially a glorified and more technological, more enjoyable version of me putting on a blindfold and you telling me where to walk so I don't walk into everything. It's a really great way to improve communication skills and bridge that gap that so many people find now that we remote work and join most of our calls through the phone. It might reach the day, eventually, that instead of coming to the office, getting cramped on the tube and sitting in traffic for hours on end, we actually just wake up, and instead of putting on a microphone and a headset, we'd put on a VR headset. And just like that, we'd be in the office. I'd no longer only recognize you by your voice, but I'd recognize you, or at least your digital avatar, because as I just explained, we're all very guilty of trying to look as good as we can online. But what do we currently do at Atos? Well, currently there's a proof of concept underway, and what it's trying to teach and understand is how we can make ourselves more understanding of others' needs. But perhaps the most bizarre study on empathy that I found was carried out across the Atlantic Ocean. Imagine if I told you all in here I was going to turn you into a cow. I was going to poke and prod you for a couple of hours and then send you on a truck to the slaughterhouse. Doesn't that sound like great fun? Well, no. But this is what Stanford University did. And they did this with a purpose, to see if it would turn you vegetarian. Does anyone think it would? Well, it did turn the subjects, but it only turned them for a short amount of time. Imagine when you go home on a Sunday, and my mum brings out this lovely, great big piece of roast beef. Am I really going to be thinking of the cow? It can only be empathy when I've got the goggles on and I am the cow. Beyond that, it's sympathy. And how many of us in here have felt sympathetic towards a cause, but never acted? I imagine it's quite a lot of us. It can also offer those who need an escape the chance to get away. My grandmother was on the kidney transplant list for over 3 years, and in that time she couldn't travel, and at times even unable to walk down the high street. Well, imagine what a great opportunity VR would have offered her. She could have sat in a dialysis chair for hours on end, put on this headset, and she's doing whatever she wants. She can still live her dreams. Where I might choose to go to Bora Bora, my gran might just decide that she wants to walk down the high street to feel normal again. And it's this idea of escape that's going to drive VR most. The idea that every single one of you in this room could do whatever you've ever dreamed of at the click of a button. So if I was to give you that power tonight, have a think about what it would be that you went home to do. But living your dreams would come at a cost. Many of you in here might have seen the episode of Black Mirror where the guy puts on a headset and enters what I'm going to describe as a house of horrors. He enters this house, and it's a house that preys on your biggest fears. It adapts and reacts to your feelings to give you the biggest scare you could ever imagine. Well, imagine if your children got access to those experiences. Whether it would be purposefully or accidentally, it wouldn't matter. The fear factor of VR is going to be so strong that the US Army have looked to use it as a torturous device. It's truly petrifying. And a study that interviewed 2,000 UK parents found that a massive 86% of them don't actually pay attention to video game age ratings. Many of you with children in here, your children might play 18-rated games like Grand Theft Auto when they're only 15. Do you think that really has an impact on them? But my point is, video games are much less immersive than virtual reality will be. VR is going to be infinitely scarier. You'll be constantly watching over your shoulder, on edge at every moment of the day. And my fear is that this could have negative mental health issues. Not only for us, but for our children, grandchildren, and anyone else who enters into this world. How are we going to adapt from going to this high-octane, high-adrenaline world to come back down to normal when we take off the goggles? What will that minority do when they fail to see the line between digital and real life? A line that's so thin due to the indistinguishable nature that Elon Musk describes. In VR, it might not mean a lot to jump a red light, but in real life, it does. Take this further with something like murder. What will that minority do when they fail to see that line? We already see the impact that video games has on children. It makes them angry. They've been jumping off slides, pretending they're a character out of Fortnite. It's really having an impact. And like I say, VR is going to be much more immersive, so we'll have a bigger impact. And although the most comprehensive study has said that there's no link between video games and child's aggression, other studies say there are. So who do you believe? Well, me personally, I'd like to believe that no one's child in here is going to commit extreme acts of violence because they played a video game. But do we really want our children growing up in a world where murder online is accepted and also encouraged? I'm not so sure we do. And this is what raises the questions about ethics. If I killed any of you inside a game, you'd simply disappear and I'd absorb some gold coins. Is that going to be legal? Because really it's pretend. But thanks to technology that exists today, like haptic feedback suits which make you feel something that's not real, you're going to feel every ounce of pain as I absorb those gold coins. It's going to be petrifying. And my biggest fear is that after you respawned 1,000 times, how are you really going to feel? Games are meant to be addictive. So just as you begin to get bored, there'll linger something else in front of you. And then bam, that's you. You're sorted. You're addicted again, which makes the gap between real life and VR massive. So how are we going to feel when we take off those goggles? I think we're going to feel numb. But that's only if we don't recognize the line between digital and life. Like I said earlier, I have the power, you have the power, and we have not only the power, but a responsibility to make sure that we drive digital as a force for good. We can make training more immersive, more enjoyable, more safe. People like my gran can escape and live their dreams. People like you, we can go home tonight and do whatever we have ever dreamed of. But the only way that we will get these things is if the leisure side pushes commercial profit. And with this comes the cons. And are you really willing to take off your goggles and live in a world full of antisocial psychopaths? I'm Ben Winfield, and thank you for listening.